Why was she the only one who felt the silence? It pressed against her chest like a weight, heavy and invisible, while the others on the rooftop shifted behind cover, scanning through their scopes as if nothing were wrong. Lieutenant Sarah crouched lower against the concrete barrier, the rifle snug against her shoulder, her breath measured in tiny, careful sips of air. Every movement mattered. Every twitch of a finger, every tilt of her head might reveal her. And yet it wasn't the enemy she feared at this moment. It was the doubt, the judgment she felt radiating from her own team. The desert heat shimmered across the broken street below. 3 months into this deployment, Sarah had learned that the heat could play tricks on your eyes. Mirage waves bent lines of sight, bent reality itself, making glass look like water, movement look like ghosts. But she had also learned that there was always something real beneath the illusion. Somewhere in the haze, an enemy could be watching, waiting. The radio cracked in her ear. "Bravo team, we have movement at your 2 o'clock. Possible sniper position." Her jaw tightened. Another test. Another moment when hesitation or overconfidence could kill not only her, but everyone under her command. She steadied her rifle and peered through her scope. Across the street, the bombed-out apartment building yawned with blackened windows, empty eye sockets staring back at her. The place smelled of war even from here. Dust, char, the metallic taste of spent rounds lingering in the air. Debris littered the ground between their position and the building, the kind of battlefield where small mistakes grew into tragedies. "I don't see anything yet," she whispered into the radio. Her men, older, hardened, skeptical, said nothing. She knew what they were thinking, that maybe she didn't have the eyes for this, that maybe she was too young, too untested. At 24, she was younger than most of them and the only woman in this combat sector with command. She had fought her way here, top of her academy class, flawless in training exercises, a volunteer for the posting that others had tried to avoid. But credentials were one thing. Out here under fire, proof had to come in the form of decisions. Split-second, irreversible decisions. She scanned again, eyes narrowing against the scope. A flicker, a glint, glass, metal, her heart rate spiked. She steadied her breath, whispered to herself the way she had during training. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. "There it is," she said softly. "3rd floor, 4th window from the left, scope reflection." "Copy that, Lieutenant. Do you have a clear shot?" Her stomach coiled. The angle was bad. Just the edge of a barrel, the faint outline of a figure tucked deep inside the shadows. "Negative, target is well concealed. I need a better position." "Understood, maintain eyes. We're calling backup." Backup 20 minutes away at best. The convoy, 15 minutes out. Her mind raced. Trucks loaded with supplies, men and women who trusted her unseen protection, would roll straight into a kill zone. Every instinct screamed that waiting meant death. So this is it, she thought. The moment that will either damn me or prove me. "Bravo 2, take my position. I'm moving east." The answer was instant, clipped, disapproving. "Lieutenant, that's not advisable. You'll be exposed." "I copy your concern, but we can't let that convoy get hit. Moving now." She didn't wait for permission. She knew she wouldn't get it. Her boots skimmed across the rooftop, body low, darting from cover to cover, air conditioning units, bent satellite dishes, crumbling concrete. Her chest burned with every breath, but her hands stayed steady on the rifle. She reached the far edge of the roof and pressed against the vent system, stealing a glance around. This new angle opened the window like a wound. She saw him now. Not just a rifle barrel, not just a shadow. A man. Civilian clothes, dark hair, his body molded to the weapon with a calm that chilled her. He was young, maybe her age, maybe less. But there was nothing reckless about him. He moved with the fluidity of a professional, someone who had done this before and lived to do it again. Her mouth went dry. This wasn't some desperate recruit. This was someone like her, trained, focused, patient. The radio whispered, "Bravo 1 convoy 5 minutes out, status." Her voice came quiet, precise. Eyes on target, preparing to engage. She lined the crosshairs over him. Center mass would end it. One pull, one breath, one decisive moment. She steadied, pressure on the trigger. Then it happened. He turned, through her scope his eye met hers, and the world stopped. For a heartbeat they weren't soldiers. They were people staring across an invisible line carved by war. His expression wasn't hatred, not anger, but recognition, surprise, and then something stranger, respect. He lowered his rifle. Sarah froze. This couldn't be real. He could have fired at the convoy. He could have turned and fired at her. Instead, he raised one hand in the faintest gesture, a salute, not mocking, not defiant, but professional. Her breath caught. She felt heat rise in her chest. What was this? What game was he playing? The radio shattered the silence. Bravo 1, convoy 2 minutes out, take the shot. Her finger tightened. The mission mattered. The lives in those trucks mattered. Yet inside her chest, something warred against instinct. She remembered every lecture drilled into her at the academy. Minimize collateral damage, neutralize threats decisively. But another voice spoke louder now. The voice that whispered of restraint, of mercy, of a choice not often available on these battlefields. Her trigger broke. The rifle cracked. But her bullet didn't end a life. It shattered stone inches from his head, showering him in dust and shards. A warning. The silence stretched again. When the dust cleared, he hadn't fled. He turned back to her. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his rifle, pointed directly at her. Her lungs locked. The barrel stared back at her, cold and certain. This was it. Her hesitation would kill her, but he didn't fire. Again. His weapon lowered, his figure retreating into the shadows. Then he was gone. Below, the convoy rolled safely through, oblivious to the unseen balance of life and death above their path. Sarah stayed in her position an hour longer, scope fixed on the empty window, waiting for him to reappear. He didn't. The weight of what had just happened pressed against her in a way bullets never had. She hadn't fired to kill. He hadn't fired to kill. And somehow, she knew this was far from over. When she returned to her team, Sargent was waiting, his face stone. Headquarters wants a full report. They'll want answers. She nodded, but her mind was already spinning. Not about her superiors, about him. About that brief, impossible exchange through glass and crosshairs. That night she began her report, her pen scratching across paper with all the precision she usually gave to her rifle. But she couldn't stop thinking of his face, his restraint, that salute, the way he had looked at her not as a target but as something else. What was he telling her in that silence? And why did she feel, with a certainty she couldn't explain, that this wasn't the last time their eyes would meet through the scope? Why did they all look at her, as if she'd already failed? The fluorescent lights in the operations room buzzed faintly, their pale glow washing over the polished table where senior officers sat in stiff silence. Sarah stood at attention, her uniform damp with sweat that had nothing to do with the desert heat. Her report had barely left her hands before the questions began, each one sharper, colder than the last. "Let me understand this, Lieutenant," Major said, his tone clipped, his eyes unreadable. "You fired a warning shot at a confirmed enemy sniper. You chose to delay engagement." Her throat tightened, but her voice came steady. "Yes, sir, the objective was met. The convoy passed safely." Shifted in the corner, arms crossed, the faintest smirk tugging at his mouth. He had been waiting for this moment. She could feel it. The colonel leaned forward. "Lieutenant, do you understand what this looks like to us? You had a clear shot at a dangerous combatant. Instead of eliminating the threat, you played games with him. That's not decisiveness. That's hesitation." Hesitation. The word struck deeper than any bullet. She wanted to argue, to shout that it hadn't been hesitation but calculation, a choice to restrain rather than destroy. But she swallowed the fire in her chest. "With respect, sir," she said carefully, "the mission's objective was to protect the convoy. That objective was achieved. No casualties, no losses." His voice broke in, edged with disdain. "She's rationalizing, sir. This is exactly what I've been saying. She doesn't have the killer instinct. She's... Enough! The colonel's voice cut through, sharp as steel. Lieutenant, you'll be writing a full debrief for the review board. They'll decide whether your judgment is sound. Until then, you remain in command, but consider yourself under observation. The meeting ended, but Sarah felt no relief. Only the cold, gnawing certainty that every move she made now would be watched. Every decision weighed not just by the enemy, but by her own side. That night sleep eluded her. The cot felt harder than usual, the hum of the base generators louder. She sat at her desk, the intelligence files spread before her. Photographs stared back at her, grainy surveillance shots, military dossiers. That was the name. Syrian military background, years of service, commendations for marksmanship. Then the war, the dissolution of his unit, his reappearance as a freelance sniper. Her fingers lingered on one photo. The eyes, the same eyes she'd seen through the scope. Focused, unflinching, but not cruel. Something else lived there. Something she hadn't expected to find staring back at her in the middle of a battlefield. She whispered to herself, almost without realizing, "Why didn't you take the shot?" The question haunted her. It wasn't just about his restraint. It was about her own. She could have ended him, ended the threat, ended the uncertainty. Instead, she had given him space, given him respect, and he had given it back. Why? The following morning intercepted her on the way to the briefing tent. His voice was low, his words meant to sting. "You should start packing, Lieutenant. The board won't let this slide. Soldiers don't survive out here by hesitating." Sarah stopped, leveled her gaze at him. "And they don't survive by killing the wrong people either." He smirked, shook his head, and walked on. But she caught the doubt flicker in his eyes, brief as it was. He wanted her to fail, wanted her gone. That much was clear. The briefing confirmed her fears. A mission was planned: search and destroy. Intelligence suggested was operating from a cluster of abandoned buildings in the residential district. Sarah would lead her team, but this time had been given the authority to override her tactical calls if he deemed her too cautious. It wasn't just a mission, it was a test. By dawn, they were moving through the hollow streets. The neighborhood was a skeleton, abandoned homes, shattered windows, walls by gunfire. A place that had once held families, children, laughter. Now it held silence, and somewhere within that silence. Sarah's eyes scanned the ground, fresh footprints in the dust, empty food containers, ammunition caches. The signs were unmistakable. He was here, watching, waiting. "Bravo 1, this is Bravo 3's voice came over the radio. "I've got movement in the corner building. Male, armed, second floor, clear shot." Her binoculars found the building. 3 stories, commanding views, too obvious, too perfect. Her gut twisted. "Bravo 3, hold your fire," she ordered. "Describe the movement." "Adult male carrying a rifle, moving between windows. He's exposed." "Negative, do not engage, it's too exposed. Could be a decoy." Silence. Then, "Lieutenant, with respect, I have a confirmed hostile target. We should take the shot." Her jaw tightened. This wasn't just about the man in the building. This was about testing her authority, daring her to fold. She weighed it. If she the shot, she'd look weak, hesitant. If she allowed it and it was wrong, innocence could die. "Bravo 3, she said, her voice hard. "That's a direct order. Do not engage. Maintain observation only." The radio crackled with static, then silence. Finally, his voice came back, sharp with anger. "Copy that, holding position." Minutes stretched into hours. Her instincts gnawed at her, whispering warnings. And then the truth revealed itself. The rifleman was no sniper, just a civilian scavenger, desperate, moving through the ruins. Sarah's breath left her in a rush. Relief and vindication tangled inside her chest. If had fired. But instead of easing the tension, the incident fueled the fire. That evening, filed a complaint. Excessive caution, compromised judgment, influence from previous enemy encounter. The words spread through the command structure like oil on water. And then came the message. Corporal Davis brought it to her late at night, eyes wide with urgency. "Lieutenant, you need to see this." It was a transcript of an intercepted communication. His voice translated from Arabic, at first routine, then her name. The American female commander showed true warrior spirit. She had the skill to kill me, but chose restraint. This is the mark of a professional soldier, but I have learned her own commanders may punish her for this decision. Sarah's heart pounded as she read. Line by line spoke of her, not as an enemy, not as prey, but as a soldier, an equal, someone he respected. And then the unthinkable. I wish to meet with her, not to surrender, not to negotiate, to speak as one soldier to another. She read it 3 times, her hands trembling. The words glowed on the page, dangerous and impossible, a request that could cost her everything. Davis spoke quietly. "Lieutenant, if the colonel sees this, they'll remove you for sure. It'll prove their point." Her mind raced. Every regulation, every code screamed that this was madness. Yet something in her gut told her the opposite. This was the chance, not just for intelligence, not just for validation, for understanding, for something beyond the lines written in blood and doctrine. She stared down at the transcript, its words echoing in her mind. True warrior spirit, professional soldier, not a murderer. For the first time since her deployment began, Sarah felt the faintest spark of hope flicker in her chest. Not safety, not survival, something deeper. That maybe this war wasn't just about who could kill faster. Maybe it could also be about who could choose not to. What kind of soldier hides intelligence from her own commanders? The question gnawed at Sarah as she sat alone in her quarters, the intercepted message trembling in her hands. She had read it so many times the words seemed etched into her skin. His voice, translated but still sharp with intent, repeated itself in her mind. She had the skill to kill me but chose restraint. This is the mark of a professional soldier. Professional, not weak, not hesitant, professional. Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Every instinct drilled into her since cadet school screamed at her to turn the message over immediately, to let the system handle it. That's what officers were supposed to do. That's what loyalty demanded. And yet, loyalty to whom? To a bureaucracy already sharpening its knives to cut her out. To commanders who didn't understand what had passed between her and the sniper in the ruined building. Her loyalty was to her soldiers, to their lives, to the convoy that had rolled through safely because she had chosen to think instead of blindly obey. She placed the transcript down, starring its final words. I wish to meet with her, not to surrender, not to negotiate, to speak as one soldier to another. It was madness, treason, a career-ending risk, but it was also a chance. Corporal Davis lingered in the doorway, shifting nervously. "Lieutenant, what do we do?" Sarah lifted her eyes. The weight of her decision pressed against her, heavy as her rifle on a long march. "We delay reporting 24 hours. Davis swallowed hard. "That's against protocol if this leaks." "I know the risk," she interrupted, her voice firm. "But listen to me. If's words are true, if he has intelligence that can save lives, can we afford not to hear him out? You've seen the ambushes, the patterns. This man doesn't fight like the others. He has rules. If he's willing to share information even once, we need to try." Silence, then Davis nodded reluctantly. "I'll cover for you, but if this blows up, it'll be my career, not yours." That night Sarah didn't sleep. She mapped out scenarios, contingencies, escape routes. Every outcome ended in risk, but so did every patrol, every convoy. Out here, risk was oxygen. What mattered was how you breathed it. By dawn, she had a plan. The meeting would be controlled, discreet, monitored by her team from a distance. If it went bad, they'd extract her. If it went well, maybe she'd walk back with something no amount of force had ever achieved. When she brought it to Colonel Martinez, she presented it with the calm of someone asking for an extra ration of fuel, not proposing the unthinkable. "Sir, I recommend arranging a controlled meeting. Intelligence, opportunity, high value. The colonel's eyes narrowed. Do you have any idea what you're suggesting? An enemy sniper is requesting an audience, and you want to treat it like a briefing. Sir, he has information. He's already proven accurate in his observations. If we ignore this, we risk. Enough, Martinez's voice cut like a blade. Forget this idea immediately. You're already on thin ice. The review board is circling. Don't give them more ammunition. She nodded outwardly, but inside the decision had already been made. Hours later, in the dusty ruins of an abandoned mosque on the city's edge, Sarah crouched low, her heart pounding so loudly she feared would hear it before he saw her. She had told her team to stay 300 meters out in overwatch. They hadn't liked it, had threatened to report her. But loyalty was a strange currency in war, and 3 of her soldiers had chosen to back her, trusting her instincts over the colonel's orders. The mosque stood broken against the horizon, walls pocked with holes, minarets cracked and leaning. Inside, sunlight streamed through shattered windows, illuminating fragments of prayer rugs shredded by shrapnel. It didn't feel like holy ground anymore. It felt like a waiting room between life and death. She stepped inside, her rifle slung across her back, hands visible, no sudden moves, no threats. And then she saw him. Sat cross-legged on the worn rug near the front, his rifle laid neatly beside him, barrel pointed away. He looked up as she entered, his expression calm, his eyes exactly as she remembered them, piercing, steady, almost unsettling in their clarity. "Lieutenant Sarah," he said in careful English. His voice was softer than she expected, measured. "Thank you for coming." Her throat felt dry. "You said you had information." A faint smile touched his lips. "Direct to business, I respect that." He gestured for her to sit opposite him. "But first, may I ask, are you in trouble with your commanders because you did not kill me?" The question hit like a body blow. For a second she forgot where she was. She forgot the rules, the layers of danger. "My tactical decisions are under review," she admitted. His brow furrowed. "This troubles me. In my culture, showing mercy to a worthy opponent is strength, not weakness. Your commanders do not understand the honor you showed." Sarah studied his face. It wasn't a mask of manipulation. He spoke with conviction, with something like sincerity. But sincerity from an enemy was a dangerous thing. "You're concerned about my career?" she asked. "I am concerned about justice," he replied. "You prevented unnecessary bloodshed and now you may be punished for it. This is wrong." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking on hers. "In my country, there is a saying, the warrior who can kill but chooses not to is stronger than the warrior who kills because he cannot choose." The words settled over her like dust in sunlight, unexpected, undeniable. For a moment, she wasn't a lieutenant and he wasn't a sniper. They were simply 2 soldiers in a crumbling mosque, talking about choices. "What information?" she pressed, forcing herself back to mission. Reached into his jacket slowly, his movements deliberate, telegraphed. He pulled out a folded map, spread it between them. Symbols, notes, lines. "For 3 months I have observed your patrols, your convoys, your supply routes. I have also watched the others, the undisciplined ones, the amateurs with rifles but no codes." He tapped the map. "These marks are planned attacks, ambushes, routes already compromised. If you continue using them, your soldiers will die." Sarah leaned closer. The positions matched places she knew well, places her unit passed through. Some weren't even flagged by American intelligence yet. Her pulse quickened. This was real. This was valuable. "Why share this?" she asked. His eyes softened, though his voice remained hard. "Because you fight like a soldier, not like an occupier. You do not target civilians. You do not destroy without purpose. Others," he gestured broadly. "They would kill your medics, your supply drivers. They care for nothing. They make this war savage. You, at least, you keep it within the lines soldiers should honor." She realized then what he wanted. Not surrender, not peace, but recognition. He wasn't betraying his cause, he was redefining it, elevating it to rules he could live with. "There is more," he said, lowering his voice. "A suicide truck. It is scheduled to arrive at your base in 1 week. The driver has already been turned. You do not know this yet. Stop it and you save many lives." Sarah's chest tightened. This was gold, life-saving gold. But it was also poison. How could she explain to her superiors that she had obtained it like this? She folded the map, tucked it carefully into her vest. "Why tell me this?" she whispered. His eyes lingered on hers. "Because I have watched you. You do not see enemies, you see people. That is rare. Perhaps if more soldiers fought like you, fewer civilians would be buried." The silence in the mosque deepened. For one strange moment, it didn't feel like enemy territory. It felt like neutral ground, a space where two professionals, two reluctant reflections, had acknowledged one another. He rose, picked up his rifle, held it across his chest not as a threat but as a ceremonial guard. Then, in one swift motion, he saluted her. Not mockery, not theater, respect. Before she realized it, her own hand returned the gesture. And then he was gone, out through a side entrance, leaving her with the map, the intel, and a decision that would either damn her or prove her right. When she stepped back into the daylight was waiting, fury burning in his eyes. "What happened in there? What did he give you?" Sarah held up the map, her voice steady, her heart still racing. "Intelligence, locations, planned attacks." Scoffed. "You expect me to believe you just chatted with an enemy sniper and he handed you this? Are you out of your mind?" She met his glare. Sometimes unconventional approaches yield conventional results. The job is to save lives. This will do that. But even as she spoke, a cold truth gnawed at her. The map could save dozens, maybe hundreds, but it would also expose her to questions, to suspicion, to a review board already sharpening its knives. And as she turned toward her waiting team, she saw movement in the distance. A silhouette in a broken window, just for a heartbeat. Watching. A hand raised, not quite a wave, not quite a salute. Acknowledgement. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Why did her boots feel heavier than usual? Every step toward the conference room seemed to echo louder, dragging her deeper into a corridor she wasn't sure she would ever walk back from. Sarah adjusted her uniform, brushed an invisible wrinkle from her sleeve and forced her shoulders square. Her mind replayed the intercepted message, the mosque's words, the folded map now locked inside intelligence files. She had done the unthinkable. Now came the reckoning. The review board chamber was colder than she expected. 5 officers sat behind a long wooden table, medals glinting against crisp uniforms. Their faces were hard, unreadable like carved stone. General Hawkins sat in the center, her presence heavy, commanding. To her left, Major General, lean and sharp-eyed. To her right, Colonel Bradley, whose reputation for zero tolerance was infamous. Sarah stood at attention. The silence was unbearable. She could hear the faint hum of the base air conditioning, the muffled thud of helicopters outside. General Hawkins finally spoke. "Lieutenant, we are convened to review your combat judgment and leadership fitness. You are aware of the concerns." "Yes, ma'am," Sarah answered, her voice even. This report lay in front of each officer, its pages heavy with accusation. Excessive caution, hesitation to engage, unauthorized movement, compromised objectivity. Every line a bullet aimed at her career. Colonel Bradley wasted no time. "Let's start with the sniper encounter. You had a confirmed hostile. Instead of neutralizing, you fired a warning shot. Explain." Sarah's mouth was dry, but her voice remained calm. The convoy's safety was the mission objective. That objective was achieved. A warning shot prevented the attack without unnecessary loss of life. Bradley's fist slammed the table. "You don't win wars with warning shots. You neutralize threats, period." Her heart thudded. She wanted to shout back, but she kept her tone steady. "Sir, no casualties occurred under my command. That is victory in my eyes." Major General leaned forward. "Then explain the intelligence. Our analysts report remarkable accuracy. Multiple ambushes prevented. A compromised truck intercepted. Where did this information come from?" Here it was, the precipice. She could lie, claim it came from local sources. Or she could tell the truth, strip herself bare before the very people eager to cut her down. Sarah inhaled slowly. "Sir, the intelligence came directly from the enemy sniper." The silence that followed was thunderous. General Hawkins's eyes narrowed. "Lieutenant, are you admitting to unauthorized contact with enemy combatants?" "Yes, ma'am." Colonel Bradley's face flushed. "That's insubordination, treason." Her chest burned, but she held her ground. "I didn't negotiate. I gathered intelligence, provided actionable information that has already saved American lives." His voice was sharp. "And what did you give him in return?" "Nothing," Sarah replied. "He shared it because he respects my approach to combat. He believes restraint can sometimes serve the mission better than blood." The officers exchanged looks, disbelief painted across their faces. Enemy respect wasn't in the manuals. It didn't fit the framework. General Hawkins broke the silence. "Lieutenant, do you believe your personal interaction with this man has compromised your objectivity?" Sarah met her eyes. "No, ma'am, I believe it has enhanced it. I understand his psychology. I know his code. And I remain fully committed to protecting our forces. If he becomes a threat again, I will act without hesitation." The words carried steel, but inside her chest trembled. The board dismissed her to deliberate. She stood alone in the hallway, every minute stretching like a lifetime. She thought of the convoy rolling safely through, of the civilian scavenger spared, of salute in the dust. Were those things weakness, or proof that she could see what others could not? When she was called back in, Hawkins's face remained unreadable. "Lieutenant, this board finds your methods unconventional and your violations serious. However, your results are undeniable. Lives were saved. Intelligence was gained. You will retain your command under close supervision." Sarah's breath hitched, relief and disbelief crashing together. "But hear this clearly," Hawkins continued. "Any future contact with enemy forces must be pre-approved. Any deviation and you will be removed permanently. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." She saluted, turned, and walked out, her body rigid until the door closed behind her. Then she exhaled shakily, the air rushing from her lungs as though she'd been holding it for hours. She was still standing, but the ground beneath her feet had shifted forever. That night she sat on the rooftop where it had all begun. The city stretched below, shadows hiding whispers of danger. She replayed the hearing, the way Bradley's hand had slammed the table, the way Hawkins's eyes had flickered, not just with judgment but with consideration. She whispered into the quiet, "Sometimes it isn't about pulling the trigger, it's about knowing when not to." Her radio crackled, Corporal Davis's voice came through. "Lieutenant, we've got chatter. A new sniper in the sector. They're calling him the Ghost. Already hit 2 patrols." Sarah's jaw tightened. A new hunter in the ruins, and where was he now? The night wind carried no answers, only questions that would not let her sleep. And somewhere she knew was watching, waiting, testing not just her aim but the boundaries of war itself. Why did her boots feel heavier than usual? Every step toward the conference room seemed to echo louder, dragging her deeper into a corridor she wasn't sure she would ever walk back from. Sarah adjusted her uniform, brushed an invisible wrinkle from her sleeve and forced her shoulders square. Her mind replayed the intercepted message, the mosque's words, the folded map now locked inside intelligence files. She had done the unthinkable. Now came the reckoning. The review board chamber was colder than she expected. 5 officers sat behind a long wooden table, medals glinting against crisp uniforms. Their faces were hard, unreadable like carved stone. General Hawkins sat in the center, her presence heavy, commanding. To her left, Major General, lean and sharp-eyed. To her right, Colonel Bradley, whose reputation for zero tolerance was infamous. Sarah stood at attention. The silence was unbearable. She could hear the faint hum of the base air conditioning, the muffled thud of helicopters outside. General Hawkins finally spoke. "Lieutenant, we are convened to review your combat judgment and leadership fitness. You are aware of the concerns." "Yes, ma'am," Sarah answered, her voice even. This report lay in front of each officer, its pages heavy with accusation. Excessive caution, hesitation to engage, unauthorized movement, compromised objectivity. Every line a bullet aimed at her career. Colonel Bradley wasted no time. "Let's start with the sniper encounter. You had a confirmed hostile. Instead of neutralizing, you fired a warning shot. Explain." Sarah's mouth was dry, but her voice remained calm. The convoy's safety was the mission objective. That objective was achieved. A warning shot prevented the attack without unnecessary loss of life. Bradley's fist slammed the table. "You don't win wars with warning shots. You neutralize threats, period." Her heart thudded. She wanted to shout back, but she kept her tone steady. "Sir, no casualties occurred under my command. That is victory in my eyes." Major General leaned forward. "Then explain the intelligence. Our analysts report remarkable accuracy. Multiple ambushes prevented. A compromised truck intercepted. Where did this information come from?" Here it was, the precipice. She could lie, claim it came from local sources. Or she could tell the truth, strip herself bare before the very people eager to cut her down. Sarah inhaled slowly. "Sir, the intelligence came directly from the enemy sniper." The silence that followed was thunderous. General Hawkins's eyes narrowed. "Lieutenant, are you admitting to unauthorized contact with enemy combatants?" "Yes, ma'am." Colonel Bradley's face flushed. "That's insubordination, treason." Her chest burned, but she held her ground. "I didn't negotiate. I gathered intelligence, provided actionable information that has already saved American lives." His voice was sharp. "And what did you give him in return?" "Nothing," Sarah replied. "He shared it because he respects my approach to combat. He believes restraint can sometimes serve the mission better than blood." The officers exchanged looks, disbelief painted across their faces. Enemy respect wasn't in the manuals. It didn't fit the framework. General Hawkins broke the silence. "Lieutenant, do you believe your personal interaction with this man has compromised your objectivity?" Sarah met her eyes. "No, ma'am, I believe it has enhanced it. I understand his psychology. I know his code. And I remain fully committed to protecting our forces. If he becomes a threat again, I will act without hesitation." The words carried steel, but inside her chest trembled. The board dismissed her to deliberate. She stood alone in the hallway, every minute stretching like a lifetime. She thought of the convoy rolling safely through, of the civilian scavenger spared, of salute in the dust. Were those things weakness, or proof that she could see what others could not? When she was called back in, Hawkins's face remained unreadable. "Lieutenant, this board finds your methods unconventional and your violations serious. However, your results are undeniable. Lives were saved. Intelligence was gained. You will retain your command under close supervision." Sarah's breath hitched, relief and disbelief crashing together. "But hear this clearly," Hawkins continued. "Any future contact with enemy forces must be pre-approved. Any deviation and you will be removed permanently. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." She saluted, turned, and walked out, her body rigid until the door closed behind her. Then she exhaled shakily, the air rushing from her lungs as though she'd been holding it for hours. She was still standing, but the ground beneath her feet had shifted forever. That night she sat on the rooftop where it had all begun. The city stretched below, shadows hiding whispers of danger. She replayed the hearing, the way Bradley's hand had slammed the table, the way Hawkins's eyes had flickered, not just with judgment but with consideration. She whispered into the quiet, "Sometimes it isn't about pulling the trigger, it's about knowing when not to." Her radio crackled. Corporal Davis's voice came through. "Lieutenant, we've got chatter. A new sniper in the sector. They're calling him the Ghost. Already hit 2 patrols." Sarah's jaw tightened. A new hunter in the ruins, and where was he now? The night wind carried no answers, only questions that would not let her sleep. And somewhere she knew was watching, waiting, testing not just her aim but the boundaries of war itself. Why did her boots feel heavier than usual? Every step toward the conference room seemed to echo louder, dragging her deeper into a corridor she wasn't sure she would ever walk back from. Sarah adjusted her uniform, brushed an invisible wrinkle from her sleeve and forced her shoulders square. Her mind replayed the intercepted message, the mosque's words, the folded map now locked inside intelligence files. She had done the unthinkable. Now came the reckoning. The review board chamber was colder than she expected. 5 officers sat behind a long wooden table, medals glinting against crisp uniforms. Their faces were hard, unreadable like carved stone. General Hawkins sat in the center, her presence heavy, commanding. To her left, Major General, lean and sharp-eyed. To her right, Colonel Bradley, whose reputation for zero tolerance was infamous. Sarah stood at attention. The silence was unbearable. She could hear the faint hum of the base air conditioning, the muffled thud of helicopters outside. General Hawkins finally spoke. "Lieutenant, we are convened to review your combat judgment and leadership fitness. You are aware of the concerns." "Yes, ma'am," Sarah answered, her voice even. This report lay in front of each officer, its pages heavy with accusation. Excessive caution, hesitation to engage, unauthorized movement, compromised objectivity. Every line a bullet aimed at her career. Colonel Bradley wasted no time. "Let's start with the sniper encounter. You had a confirmed hostile. Instead of neutralizing, you fired a warning shot. Explain." Sarah's mouth was dry, but her voice remained calm. The convoy's safety was the mission objective. That objective was achieved. A warning shot prevented the attack without unnecessary loss of life. Bradley's fist slammed the table. "You don't win wars with warning shots. You neutralize threats, period." Her heart thudded. She wanted to shout back, but she kept her tone steady. "Sir, no casualties occurred under my command. That is victory in my eyes." Major General leaned forward. "Then explain the intelligence. Our analysts report remarkable accuracy. Multiple ambushes prevented. A compromised truck intercepted. Where did this information come from?" Here it was, the precipice. She could lie, claim it came from local sources. Or she could tell the truth, strip herself bare before the very people eager to cut her down. Sarah inhaled slowly. "Sir, the intelligence came directly from the enemy sniper." The silence that followed was thunderous. General Hawkins's eyes narrowed. "Lieutenant, are you admitting to unauthorized contact with enemy combatants?" "Yes, ma'am." Colonel Bradley's face flushed. "That's insubordination, treason." Her chest burned, but she held her ground. "I didn't negotiate. I gathered intelligence, provided actionable information that has already saved American lives." His voice was sharp. "And what did you give him in return?" "Nothing," Sarah replied. "He shared it because he respects my approach to combat. He believes restraint can sometimes serve the mission better than blood." The officers exchanged looks, disbelief painted across their faces. Enemy respect wasn't in the manuals. It didn't fit the framework. General Hawkins broke the silence. "Lieutenant, do you believe your personal interaction with this man has compromised your objectivity?" Sarah met her eyes. "No, ma'am, I believe it has enhanced it. I understand his psychology. I know his code. And I remain fully committed to protecting our forces. If he becomes a threat again, I will act without hesitation." The words carried steel, but inside her chest trembled. The board dismissed her to deliberate. She stood alone in the hallway, every minute stretching like a lifetime. She thought of the convoy rolling safely through, of the civilian scavenger spared, of salute in the dust. Were those things weakness, or proof that she could see what others could not? When she was called back in, Hawkins's face remained unreadable. "Lieutenant, this board finds your methods unconventional and your violations serious. However, your results are undeniable. Lives were saved. Intelligence was gained. You will retain your command under close supervision." Sarah's breath hitched, relief and disbelief crashing together. "But hear this clearly," Hawkins continued. "Any future contact with enemy forces must be pre-approved. Any deviation and you will be removed permanently. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." She saluted, turned, and walked out, her body rigid until the door closed behind her. Then she exhaled shakily, the air rushing from her lungs as though she'd been holding it for hours. She was still standing, but the ground beneath her feet had shifted forever. That night she sat on the rooftop where it had all begun. The city stretched below, shadows hiding whispers of danger. She replayed the hearing, the way Bradley's hand had slammed the table, the way Hawkins's eyes had flickered, not just with judgment but with consideration. She whispered into the quiet, "Sometimes it isn't about pulling the trigger, it's about knowing when not to." Her radio crackled, Corporal Davis's voice came through. "Lieutenant, we've got chatter. A new sniper in the sector. They're calling him the Ghost. Already hit 2 patrols." Sarah's jaw tightened. A new hunter in the ruins, and where was he now? The night wind carried no answers, only questions that would not let her sleep. And somewhere she knew was watching, waiting, testing not just her aim but the boundaries of war itself. What happens when the enemy you understand disappears, and one you don't takes his place? The question stalked Sarah as she scanned the desolate rooftops through her scope, her breath steady but her nerves frayed. It had been 6 weeks since the review board, 6 weeks of walking the tightrope between command's suspicion and her soldiers' trust, 6 weeks of every order she gave being second-guessed by, who carried his bitterness like a weapon. And then the Ghost appeared. 2 American soldiers dead in less than a week, civilians wounded, convoys rattled by bullets from nowhere. Unlike this new sniper showed no discipline, no code. He struck fast, vanished faster, and left behind only blood. Now Sarah found herself back where it had all begun, on a rooftop, heat shimmering in the distance, rifle steady against her shoulder. Only this time she wasn't waiting for, she was hunting the Ghost. "Lieutenant," Corporal Davis's voice came through her earpiece. "Movement. Water Tower, Sector 7. Sarah's scope locked onto the structure. A tall, skeletal tower casting its shadow across the street below. And there it was, the faint gleam of a barrel. The Ghost had chosen his perch well. From there he could cut down the medical convoy scheduled to pass in 20 minutes. Her finger hovered near the trigger. "Confirmed hostile sniper," she whispered, preparing to engage. But then her eyes caught something unexpected. A second figure climbing the ladder on the outside of the tower, moving with purpose, not sneaking, not hiding, ascending. Sarah's breath caught. The figure reached the platform, pulled himself up with ease. Her scope sharpened on his face. The name thundered in her mind. It made no sense. He wasn't supposed to be here. His contract with the militants had ended, intelligence said. But there he was, in the flesh, walking straight into the Ghost's nest. The radio crackled with urgent voices. "Bravo 1, multiple targets in sniper position. Do you have a shot?" Sarah's pulse raced. She had 2 shots, 2 clear angles, both exposed. One enemy she understood, one she didn't. Through her scope she watched approach the Ghost with empty hands raised. He wasn't carrying his rifle. He wasn't preparing to fire. He was speaking. The Ghost turned, weapon trained on his chest. For a moment Sarah thought she was about to watch die. But the shot never came. The Ghost hesitated. His posture shifted, uncertain. His lips moved, his gestures sharp, pointing toward the convoy below, then toward Sarah's position, as if weaving a thread between them all. Bravo 1, confirm. Do you have shots on both targets? Colonel Martinez's voice sliced through the static. Affirmative, Sarah said, her throat tight. Engage immediately. Eliminate both. That's an order. Her finger brushed the trigger, but something in her chest screamed against it. Through her scope, she saw his urgency, the way he leaned in, the way the ghost's stance softened. She couldn't hear the words, but she felt their weight. Wasn't defending himself. He was persuading. Bravo 1, why haven't you fired? Martinez barked. She steadied her breath. Time slowed. She remembered words in the mosque. Sometimes the battle you choose not to fight is the greatest victory. Then it happened. The ghost lowered his rifle, slowly, deliberately. He began dismantling it, breaking it into parts, sliding them into his pack. Within minutes, both men vanished down the ladder, disappearing into the ruins below. The convoy rolled safely through, untouched. Sarah exhaled, her whole body trembling. She had disobeyed again, and this time the consequences would come fast. Martinez stormed onto the rooftop 20 minutes later, fury in his eyes. Lieutenant, what happened here? Why weren't the targets engaged? She stood at attention, but her voice carried calm conviction. Sir, the threat to the convoy was neutralized without lethal force. Both snipers. His jaw clenched. We intercepted fragments of their conversation, mentioned your name, care to explain that? Her heart thudded. The monitoring equipment had betrayed her silence. Sir, she said carefully, it appeared was persuading the ghost to abandon his attack. His intervention achieved our objective without risk to the convoy. Martinez stared at her, disbelief hardening into something darker. Are you telling me you've developed a working relationship with an enemy sniper? The question lingered in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Sarah knew her answer could end her career, but the truth pressed against her chest like a loaded weapon, demanding release. Yes, sir, she said quietly. I believe has chosen to prioritize professional conduct over ideology. Today, he acted to protect a medical convoy. His actions were not hostile. They were honorable. Martinez's silence was worse than shouting. He turned away, radioing base command. This is Martinez, Priority Alpha. Get me General Hawkins immediately. As they walked back to base, Sarah's mind reeled. She had disobeyed a direct order, again. But she had also witnessed the impossible, turning an enemy away from bloodshed. What did that mean? Was it loyalty to her, or loyalty to some code larger than either of them? That night she received a message from command. Not punishment, not dismissal, a summons. The military wasn't going to bury this. They were going to study it, leverage it, use her strange, fragile connection with as a weapon of its own. Colonel Martinez delivered the news with grim finality. You'll be assigned to a joint task force. Psychologists, analysts, strategists. They want to understand what you've built with him, Lieutenant. They think it might be useful. Sarah swallowed hard. Useful, that's what she was now, not just a soldier, an asset, a bridge between worlds no one believed could touch. She lay awake in her quarters that night, staring at the ceiling, her chest heavy with unease. She had walked into this war to prove herself as a leader. Now she was something else entirely. A symbol, a risk, a test case in a war where lines blurred faster than they were drawn. And somewhere out there was walking the ruins too, watching, waiting, choosing his battles. She whispered into the darkness, unsure if the words were prayer or warning. What are you doing, and how long can this fragile thread hold before it snaps? What does it mean to become valuable to people you no longer trust? The thought stalked Sarah as she sat in the briefing room weeks later, surrounded not by her squad, but by men and women in clean uniforms and pressed suits. The Joint Task Force looked less like soldiers and more like scholars dissecting a living experiment. And she was the specimen. A psychologist with thin glasses leaned forward. "Lieutenant, when you first encountered, what did you feel in the moment?" Sarah blinked. Feel? She wasn't used to questions like that. "I felt," her words stumbled. She had rehearsed tactical answers, not emotional ones. "I felt surprise, recognition. He had the shot, I had the shot. Neither of us took it." The man scribbled something on a notepad. Another analyst, a civilian contractor with tired eyes, spoke next. "You believe operates under a personal code, that he distinguishes between legitimate and illegitimate targets. Why does that matter to us?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "Because codes shape choices, and choices determine casualties. If influences others, his restraint changes the battlefield. It already has." The room murmured. Some nodded. Others looked skeptical. Colonel Martinez sat at the end of the table, arms crossed, watching her like a hawk. For weeks this became her life. No longer patrolling dusty streets, no longer crouched behind sandbags. Instead, she dissected her encounters like autopsies. Every word had spoken, every glance, every gesture. Analysts pressed her to speculate, to translate not just his language but his motives. At night she still returned to her unit. Her soldiers trusted her, even admired her, though their questions grew sharper. Though his silence was louder than any accusation. And then, one evening, Corporal Davis slipped into her quarters again, urgency etched across his face. "Lieutenant," another message came through the network. Her heart lurched. She took the paper with trembling hands. This one was shorter, but its words cut deep. "Lieutenant, you have shown that honor exists even in the darkest places. I am leaving this region. But before I go, you should know, your example has already changed others. 3 snipers have abandoned attacks on medical convoys because of you. Sometimes, the greatest victory is the enemy who chooses to become something better." It was signed simply, "A fellow professional." Sarah sat back, the paper trembling between her fingers. Her chest swelled with something that felt like relief, but it was heavier than that. A strange sorrow threaded through it, too, was leaving. The thread between them was fraying. But his words carried weight. Others had changed because of him, because of her. Was that possible? Could one act of restraint ripple outward, shaping choices she would never see? For hours she stared at the letter, at the signature. She whispered to herself, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." The next morning she presented the message to the task force. The analysts dissected it like surgeons. One called it propaganda, another called it psychological warfare, but Sarah knew better. She had seen his eyes through the scope. She had heard his voice in the broken mosque. This wasn't a trick. It was truth, however fragile. Colonel Martinez pulled her aside afterward. "You're walking a razor's edge, Lieutenant. Some of them think you're compromised. Others think you're a visionary. I don't know which one scares me more." Sarah met his gaze, her voice steady. "Sir, I don't know which one I am either." The days that followed blurred together. Patrols continued. Convoys rolled. The ghost vanished from the region, his shadow fading as quickly as it had appeared. Some whispered had convinced him to leave, though no one knew for certain. Approached her one evening, his face uncharacteristically solemn. "Lieutenant," he said quietly, "I don't get you, I never will," but he hesitated, then continued. "Soldiers are alive because of you, I can't ignore that." It wasn't an apology, but it was something. Weeks turned into months. Never returned. But the memory of him lingered, in Sarah's reports, in the analyst's studies, in the whispers of soldiers who told each other the story of the enemy sniper who saluted instead of killing. It became folklore, a legend passed between patrols, between units. Some embellished, some doubted, but all repeated it. Sarah carried it like a scar, invisible but permanent. She knew legends were dangerous. They could inspire hope, or they could invite suspicion. But she also knew that once a story entered the bloodstream of soldiers, it was impossible to erase. One night, under the dim glow of her desk lamp, she opened her journal and wrote, War brings out both the worst and best in people. The challenge for leaders is to encourage the best while being prepared to confront the worst. Sometimes an enemy's respect teaches you more about yourself than a superior's approval ever could. Her pen paused, then she added, "Sometimes the greatest weapon is restraint, and sometimes the greatest enemy is doubt." She closed the journal, exhaled, and let the silence settle around her. Was gone, but he was. He lived in the space between her choices now, in the moral shadows of every order she gave. And she understood something she hadn't before. She wasn't just surviving this war anymore. She was changing it. Why did the legend grow larger than the truth? Sarah heard fragments of her own story whispered across the base weeks later, reshaped in the mouths of soldiers she had never met. Some said she, and had stared through their scopes for hours, a silent duel no bullet could end. Others claimed he had lowered his weapon first, bowing in respect to her discipline. One version even imagined crossing enemy lines, laying his rifle at her feet. None of it was true, and yet all of it carried the heartbeat of something real. The story had spread like fire. From chow tents to patrol trucks, from rookie privates to weathered sergeants, the tale of the sniper who saluted became folklore. Soldiers, starved for something human in a war that stripped away humanity, clung to it. Sarah carried it differently. To her, it wasn't legend. It was a scar, a moment that had cracked open everything she thought she knew about war and about herself. She felt its weight every time she walked into the briefing room. Officers eyed her with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. Some saw her as reckless, too willing to gamble with protocol. Others saw her as proof that the battlefield wasn't just about kill counts, that restraint could be power. Though his silence was loudest of all. One evening, as they prepared for patrol, he approached her. The desert air was cooling, shadows lengthening across the compound. His voice was low, stripped of sarcasm for the first time she could remember. "I don't get it, Lieutenant," he said. "I don't get you." Sarah braced herself. Another criticism, another accusation, but then he surprised her. "You've kept us alive. I fought you on every decision, but we're still here. That means something." She studied his face. The hard edges of resentment were still there, but softer now, carved into something like reluctant respect. "I'm not asking you to agree with me," she said quietly. "I'm asking you to trust that I'll do whatever it takes to protect this team, even if it doesn't look the way you expect." Nodded once, no apology, no warmth, but something had shifted. The missions continued. Patrols through hollow streets, convoys through narrow, overwatch from rooftops that felt too familiar. Was gone, but his absence was its own presence. Sarah felt it in the quiet spaces between her decisions, as though he were still watching, still judging. The analysts fed her reports. 3 confirmed snipers have abandoned civilian-targeted attacks. Intercepts suggest influence persists. Enemy chatter refers to him as a soldier's soldier. Each line blurred the line further. He wasn't just an adversary anymore. He was an example, one claimed by both sides for different reasons. And Sarah, she became the unwilling bridge. At night, she opened her journal, searching for words to anchor herself. Respect between enemies doesn't end a war, but it can change how it is fought. That is something worth carrying. Her soldiers noticed changes too. Davis, usually quiet, lingered after briefings. "Lieutenant, can I say something?" he asked one night. She nodded. "Back home, I used to think soldiers were either heroes or monsters. Out here, it feels like we're all something in between. You showed me that. You made me think maybe we can fight and still hold onto something human." The words struck her harder than any commendation. She realized then that what she had done wasn't just about. It was about them, about proving to her own soldiers that war didn't have to hollow them out. But command never let her forget the danger. Colonel Martinez reminded her in every briefing, "You're still on thin ice. One misstep and the board won't save you again." She understood. The army didn't know what to do with someone like her, too useful to discard, too unpredictable to fully trust. One morning, as the sun clawed its way over the horizon, Sarah led her team through a maze of alleyways. The mission was routine: secure a supply route. But as they moved, she caught sight of graffiti sprayed across a crumbling wall. Two silhouettes facing each other through rifles, and beneath them scrawled in Arabic a single word: respect. Her breath caught. Shadow was everywhere, even where he was. That night she sat with on the rooftop. Neither spoke for a long time. The stars shimmered faintly above, muffled by city haze. Finally broke the silence. "You ever think about what happens when this ends?" he asked. Sarah tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "I mean when the shooting stops, when we go home. Do we remember the worst of it, or the parts like," he trailed off, gesturing vaguely, "like whatever you had?" Sarah stared at the horizon. The city stretched dark and broken. "I think we remember both. The worst keeps us cautious. The other parts keep us human." Grunted softly, as if he wanted to argue but couldn't. Instead, he muttered, "Maybe." In that fragile silence, Sarah realized something. She had been trying so hard to prove herself to her superiors, to survive their scrutiny. But the real measure of her choices wasn't in medals or reprimands. It was in the way her soldiers carried themselves, in the way had softened, in the way Davis had spoken with hope instead of despair. The war had carved scars into all of them, but somehow she had found a way to show that scars didn't have to mean surrendering humanity. As she closed her eyes against the desert wind, Sarah felt it for the first time: not triumph, not vindication. Something quieter, something steadier. The beginning of acceptance. And yet she knew the story wasn't finished, because wars don't end with legends. They end with choices, and hers were far from over. What remains when the war moves on, but the choices stay behind? The question followed Sarah as her deployment wound toward its quiet end. There were no banners, no triumphant music, just the slow grind of time. Convoys still rolled. Patrols still marched. The desert heat still pressed like a weight against every soldier's chest. But the war had changed, and so had she. She was no longer the lieutenant fighting to prove herself against scorn or her superiors' doubts. She had survived the board, survived the ghost, survived her own decisions. And in the spaces between those battles, she had discovered something far more enduring than rank or reputation: the fragile, undeniable truth that even in war, dignity could exist. The analysts came less frequently now, their notebooks filled with pages of theories and assessments, each trying to explain the unexplainable. The phenomenon, some of them called it, as though it were a weather pattern or a scientific anomaly. Sarah hated the term. To her, it wasn't a phenomenon. It was a man, a soldier, a moment of shared recognition that had spiraled into something larger than either of them. Never said much about it again, but his silence had shifted. It no longer carried disdain. Instead, it carried a grudging respect, the kind soldiers give when words aren't enough. Once, during a lull on patrol, he had muttered, "Doesn't mean I'd have done it your way, but it worked." That was as close to an apology as he would ever offer. Davis, though, remained different, changed. His voice carried more conviction, his eyes more steadiness. He began mentoring younger soldiers, repeating the same message Sarah had once whispered to herself. That restraint was not weakness, but strength. She watched him grow and realized that maybe's respect hadn't just shaped her. It had rippled outward, reshaping the men and women under her command. One evening, as the sky turned to ash and gold, Sarah climbed the same rooftop where it had all begun. The city stretched before her, and silent. She rested her rifle against the wall, not to aim, but to remember. Through her mind's eye, she saw it all again. The first glint in the shattered window, the locked gaze through the scopes, the salute, the mosque, the folded map, the whispered words about warrior spirit, the ghost lowering his weapon because had told him to, the letter signed a fellow professional. She closed her eyes and felt the weight of it all. the invisible thread connecting every decision she had made. She thought of the review board, their stern faces softening only when results forced them to. She thought of her soldiers, alive because of choices that had nearly cost her career. She thought of walking away into the ruins, never to return. And she wondered, was he still alive somewhere? Did he still carry her in his memory the way she carried him? Or had the war finally claimed him, as it claimed so many? The truth was, she would never know, and maybe that was the point. Weeks later, her deployment ended. She boarded the transport plane with her team, the roar of the engines drowning out every thought. She looked around at their faces, tired but alive, and felt a quiet pride that had nothing to do with medals or commendations. Years passed. Ranks climbed. She became colonel, standing in lecture halls instead of bombed-out streets, teaching the next generation of officers. Her voice carried across classrooms filled with eager cadets, eyes wide, notebooks ready. She never told them everything. Some stories were too heavy, too tangled, but she told them the parts that mattered, about hesitation that wasn't weakness, about restraint that could save more than bullets ever could, about dignity in the face of chaos. And sometimes, when cadets asked her the hardest questions, about morality, about the humanity of enemies, she would tell them a story, not as fact, not as doctrine, but as a lesson. "I once faced an enemy sniper," she would begin softly. "I had the shot. He had the shot. Neither of us took it. And in that silence we discovered something the war had almost erased: respect." The cadets leaned in, captivated, some skeptical, some awed. She let the silence linger before finishing. "War will demand that you kill. That is its nature. But never forget, sometimes the greatest strength lies in choosing not to. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts." When she left the classroom, walking the polished halls of the academy, she carried the memory of with her. Not as a ghost, not as a legend, but as a reminder that the battlefield was not just a place of destruction, but also a place where unlikely fragments of humanity could survive. At night, when the lights dimmed and the quiet returned, she would sit alone and open her journal. She wrote not of tactics or missions, but of moments: the convoy spared, the scavenger saved, the salute, the letter, the ripple of choices that had changed lives. And on the final page she wrote, "War brings out both the worst and best in people. The challenge for leaders is to encourage the best while being prepared to confront the worst. Sometimes, the respect of an enemy teaches you more about yourself than the praise of a friend. And sometimes, the greatest victory is not in ending a life, but in recognizing one." She closed the journal gently, her hand resting on its cover. Outside, the world was quiet, but she knew that somewhere on some rooftop, another soldier stared through a scope, faced with the same impossible choice. And maybe, just maybe, that soldier would remember the story of Lieutenant Sarah, the one who had been nearly removed from duty, yet endured, the one whose silence had been louder than a rifle shot, the one who had proved that even in the darkest places, dignity could still stand tall.